lacto-fermentation and looking for your first recipe to get started, I have got a perfect one for you. Today we're making a classic sauerkraut. So there are a few reasons I think this is the best first recipe to get started if you have never fermented anything else before. Reason number one, you need very few ingredients. All we need is a cabbage, salt, and caraway seed, and even the caraway seed is optional in this recipe. If you don't have it, you can still make the sauerkraut. Reason number two is sauerkraut is a very easy to use condiment. You can put it in a sandwich, add it in hot dogs, salad, serve on the side of grilled meat. There are just so many ways to use it, and they're so delicious and good for the gut. Reason number three, the salt to cabbage ratio in this recipe is really straightforward. I'm gonna give you the exact measurement that you're gonna use, so you don't have to worry about calculating the salt to cabbage ratio or salt to water ratio. I do have other video covering the topic, so check it out at the link here. For your first fermented project, keep it simple. You really don't have to worry about any of that until down the road you start to ferment a variety of vegetables. Reason number four is you don't need any fancy equipment. I have been fermenting for many years and I haven't bought anything expensive. If someone tells you you need to have all these fermentation gadgets, that's not true. It may make your life a little easier, but they're not necessary. For this recipe, you're gonna need a big mixing bowl, cutting board, knife. I also have a scale, measuring spoons, and measuring cup. This is optional, you may not need it. If you don't have mason jars, you can use any jars you have. Pretty much all the equipment you need are already in your kitchen. Alright, without further ado, let's chop up some cabbage first. Cut the cabbage in half. This makes it easy to remove the core and discard it. Then slice the cabbage into very thin strips. Next, we'll weigh the cabbage. Place a large mixing bowl on the kitchen scale. Press that button to zero out the weight of the bowl. Then start adding cabbage a handful at a time until you get to the desired amount. Notice I removed the cabbage core before weighing the cabbage. That's because I like to know exactly how much vegetables I'm working with. So I ended up using one extra mixing bowl because I'm planning to make 3 quarts of sauerkraut today. I need exactly 6 pounds of cabbage. So in the smaller mixing bowl, I have 2 pounds of cabbage. In this larger mixing bowl, I have 4 pounds of cabbage. The perfect salt ratio for making sauerkraut here, in my opinion, is 1 tablespoon salt for every 2 pounds of cabbage. Now I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of salt in the 2 pounds of cabbage over here, and about 2 teaspoons of caraway seeds. In the large mixing bowl, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of salt to the 4 pounds of cabbage and about 4 teaspoons of caraway seeds. I'm actually making the sauerkraut using the exact recipe as on my blog so that you can go ahead to print it out and follow along the video. Now that all the ingredients are combined, massage the cabbage to let every bit get in touch with the salt. If you have a few hours to spare and just let the cabbage sit in the bowl, you won't have to massage as much. When the cabbage is wilted and the juice comes out, it's time to pack them into jars. You may wonder why I'm making 6 pounds of sauerkraut all at once. Remember, sauerkraut is naturally preserved. It has a really long shelf life in cold storage. I find the lengthy process of making sauerkraut even worthwhile to make just a small jar. 6 pounds of caraway sauerkraut usually give me a whole year of supply. Since I'm also eating other fermented vegetables throughout the year, I only need to make the sauerkraut recipe once a year during cabbage season, when cabbage is the cheapest, freshest, and the most abundant. I also find it kind of cool that 2 pounds of cabbage fit exactly into a quart-sized mason jar. For 6 pounds of cabbage, you will need 3 of them. Make sure you pack the jars really tight and keep the cabbage under its own juice. As long as the cabbage gets a good massage and plenty of rest, they will release enough juice 9 or 10 times, so you don't need to add water when making sauerkraut. But once in a while, you may have a dry cabbage or short on time, and you will need to make additional salt brine. So looking at the jar, we definitely have enough cabbage juice to submerge all of the cabbage, but let's pretend we don't so that I can show you guys how to make a salt brine to cover up your dry cabbage. I'm mixing 1 teaspoon of salt into 1 1/3 cups of water. This should be just a bit more than what you need for 3 quarts of sauerkraut, but if you want to make more or less salt brine, make sure to stick to the same ratio. When it comes to fermenting, I always use filtered water. I have a reverse osmosis system, but it's not a must. The point is, you use whatever water filter you have to remove as much as possible the contaminants in the water that may prevent lactic bacteria growth. For the same reason, we want to encourage growth of the good bacteria with the salt we use as well. There's a general belief that iodized salt prevents bacterial growth. Whether it's proven or not, it's best to avoid them to be safe, and there are other salt options out there. My preference is always sea salt and Himalayan salt because they provide more minerals and nutrients to encourage the probiotic microbes and help the fermentation process along. Once the jars are filled, close the lids loosely so that no oxygen will enter but still allows air to escape. Honestly, I could have left a little more space from top of the brine to the rim of the jar, if not because I wanted to pack the extra salt brine into the jars. It's not a big deal. I always place my jars on a plate, then leave them in a dark cupboard or just cover with a towel. Within a couple days, the cabbage will release bubbles. Today is day 3 of the fermentation, so let's take a look at the sauerkraut. This is why we have a plate under the jar to catch the overflowing juice from the sauerkraut. When cabbage ferments, the lactic acid bacteria produce carbon dioxide, pushing the cabbage all the way up to the rim of the jar. In order to let out the air and keep the cabbage under the brine, I simply burp the jars a couple times a day and press the cabbage down with a fork. This is where you see other people using weights and airlocks to save the step of checking on the jars daily. I really don't mind my way because the bubbling is only really active during the first week of fermentation, and then it will subside. By the end of the second week, you will barely see any activities. So even though I'm fermenting the sauerkraut for 4 to 6 weeks, I'm only attending to it for 1 to 2 weeks. Another limitation of commercial weights and airlocks is that they're designed to fit White Mouse Mason jars. If you use a lot of recycled glass jars of random sizes and shapes like I do, they won't be compatible. This is why I have been taking the more economical approach to fermenting. Although technically you can eat your sauerkraut after a couple weeks, I like mine fermented for 4 to 6 weeks. The flavor really develops as the sauerkraut matures. Once it reaches the desired taste, store the sauerkraut in the fridge.